By October, his cabin looked more like a hill than a house, and people had plenty to say about it. Frank Cahill said it the loudest, called it a burial mound. Eleanor heard every word and said nothing. But she watched him dig every evening. Eleanor watched him dig every evening from the corner of her fence, and she said nothing. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Caleb Mercer came into the Bitterroot Valley in the spring of 1879 with $14 in his pocket and 43 days on the road behind him. He walked the last 9 miles from the coach stop because the fare would have cost him 2 of those dollars, and he needed every cent he had left. His boots were scuffed brown leather worn thin at the soles. His rust-brown wool coat hung open over a cream-colored Henley that had gone gray with trail dust somewhere back in Idaho. The short-handled Army surplus shovel slung through his belt knocked against his hip with every step, its notched wooden grip smooth from years of use. He was tall, 6'2", broad-shouldered, rangy in the way men get when they've been eating once a day for weeks. Dark brown hair pushed back off his forehead, matted with sweat. Pale gray-blue eyes set deep under heavy brows. A nose that had been broken at least once, crooked at the bridge. A small birthmark shaped like a thumbprint sat on the left side of his neck, just below his ear. He had no people, no plan worth the word. Just a homestead filing he'd paid $2 for at the land office in Helena. A piece of paper that said 160 acres of Montana territory belonged to him if he could prove up on it in 5 years. That was the whole of it. A man with a shovel and a piece of paper, and not much else. He found his quarter section at the base of a north-facing slope where the canyon opened up toward the peaks. Good water. A creek ran clear and cold through the southeast corner, fed by snowmelt that wouldn't quit until August. But the site sat square in the throat of the canyon wind. It funneled down from those mountains like something with a grudge, and when it hit that north-facing slope, it had nowhere to go but straight through whatever stood in its path. Every other settler in the valley had built on the flats. Sheltered ground. Sensible ground. Caleb looked at the creek and the slope and the wind and chose the place nobody wanted. He started on the cabin in June, alone. No neighbors lending a hand, no barn raising, no borrowed mules. He felled lodgepole pines and notched them himself, dragged them with a rope over his shoulder, stacked them course by course. The cabin was small, maybe 14 by 16, tight, low-roofed, built like something meant to crouch. He put no window on the north wall. People noticed that. They noticed all of it, in the way that settlements notice a stranger doing strange things on bad land. By the middle of July, the roof was on, and the door hung, and Caleb Mercer had a home. If you could call it that. Frank Cahill rode up on a Tuesday. Frank was James Cahill's brother, James being the man who'd died 18 months prior and left a widow and 50 acres and a small herd of cattle that didn't care about grief. Frank was stocky, barrel-chested, about 5'9", with sandy blonde hair receding at the temples and pale brown eyes set too close together. He had a brass-handled walking stick he used more for pointing at things than for walking, and he had opinions the way some men have debts, always accumulating, never paid off. He sat his horse at the edge of Caleb's clearing and looked at the cabin the way you'd look at a dog someone had dressed in a hat. "You built on the north slope." Not a question, a verdict. Caleb was splitting kindling. He looked up, nodded. "Wind comes through here November to March like the hand of God himself trying to push you back to wherever you came from." Frank tapped his walking stick against his saddle horn. "You'll be frozen out by Christmas. A man with any sense would have filed on the Graham parcel down in the flats." Caleb set another piece of wood on the block, split it clean. "Appreciate the advice." That was all he said. Frank waited for more. didn't get it. He rode off with his chin up and his chest out, the way Frank Cahill did everything, like the valley owed him an audience. Now, Eleanor. Eleanor Cahill was 31 years old, and she had been holding 50 acres together by herself since the day they put James in the ground. She was petite, 5'4", but sturdy in the way that mattered, with strong hands and forearms that came from doing everything herself. Honey blonde hair pulled into a tight braid over one shoulder, loose wisps framing a face that was pretty and tired in equal measure. Hazel green eyes. A small pale brown birthmark on her right temple near the hairline. A tarnished brass pocket watch on a thin leather cord hung around her neck, always tucked inside her collar. Her land bordered Caleb's quarter section to the south. She could see his clearing from the far corner of her fence line, where the posts leaned and the wire sagged because there were only so many hours in a day and she'd already used all of them. She watched the new homesteader work. She did not introduce herself. She had cattle to move and hay to cut and a fence that was losing the war against gravity, and curiosity was a luxury for people with time. August came in hot and dry. Caleb started doing something nobody could figure. He cut sod blocks, big ones, heavy, dense with root, and began stacking them along the north and west walls of his cabin. Tight, methodical. Then he dug a trench around the foundation, 18 inches deep, and lined it with creek gravel for drainage. Settlers rode past on the track above his clearing. They slowed their horses. They shook their heads. By late September, Caleb had started shoveling earth against the cabin walls, packing it hard with the flat of that army surplus shovel, sloping it upward until the logs began to vanish. The cabin was disappearing, becoming something else, more hill than house, more burrow than building. The first whispers found their legs in the settlement around then, the way whispers do. And Frank Cahill, chin up, walking stick in hand, leaning against the counter at the general store like he owned the place and was just letting everyone else use it, said the man was building his own grave. Frank's words carry weight in the settlement. He's James Cahill's brother. He owns the most cattle, and when he says a man is touched, people nod along. That's how it works with Frank. He's not evil, I want to be clear about that. He's not the kind of man who kicks a dog or cheats at cards. He's worse than that. He's the kind of man who genuinely believes he knows what's best for everyone and has never once been told otherwise. James Cahill died owing Frank nothing, but Frank stepped into that dead man's boots like they were tailored for him. Started managing Eleanor's affairs without being asked. Started showing up to her ranch with his charcoal gray vest buttoned tight over that barrel chest, that brass-handled walking stick pointing at fence posts and water troughs and anything else he could find wrong. He'd rock back on his heels, chin up, and deliver opinions like they were scripture. You're running 12 head too many for this grass. You need to sell the South 40 before winter. A woman alone out here is a problem waiting to happen. He said that last one to her face. To her face. And Eleanor Cahill, 5'4", hands raw from wire, that tarnished brass pocket watch tucked against her collarbone like a heartbeat she refused to let stop. Eleanor looked at him and said nothing. She just went back to work. That's the thing about Eleanor. She didn't argue with Frank, because arguing with Frank meant acknowledging he had authority over her life. And she would sooner chew leather than give him that. Her days started before light. I know because I could see the lantern moving through her barn from my half-buried cabin across the draw. She fed cattle at dawn. Alone. Carried hay bales that weighed damn near as much as she did. Her honey blonde braids swinging over one shoulder, those mud-caked lace-up boots leaving prints in frost that hadn't melted yet. By 7, she was mending fence. By noon, she was at her kitchen table with a pencil and a ledger, keeping accounts that would have made a bank clerk sweat. She did not complain. Not once. Not to anyone. She held that ranch the way a person holds a rope over a cliff. Not because she wants to, but because letting go is not a choice. Her sage green dress was faded almost white at the elbows. Her hands were cracked and bleeding by September's end. The small, pale brown birthmark on her right temple caught the light sometimes when she turned her head fast, and it was the only soft thing about her. Anna Reed saw all of it. Anna was the oldest woman in the valley. Late 60s, maybe 67. A widow twice over who'd homesteaded this land back when homesteading meant you might die doing it. She was small, 5'1", wiry, silver-white hair pulled into a low, tight bun, so tight it looked like it hurt. Her eyes were sharp pale blue, almost gray, set deep under heavy hooded lids, and they missed absolutely nothing. She had a battered tin coffee cup with a bent handle that she carried everywhere like other women carried Bibles. You'd see her on the road at odd hours, that heavy brown wool coat hanging past her knees, her dark scarf wrapped twice around her neck, hands clasped behind her back, just watching. Watching people work. Watching people fail. Watching people pretend they were fine. She said little. When she did speak, it landed like a stone dropped into still water, and the ripples went on for days. The first time I spoke to Eleanor directly was the 3rd week of September. I needed creek water. The creek ran through her property. I could have just walked down there. Nobody would have stopped me. Nobody would have known. But something in me wouldn't allow it. I found her by the south fence line, tightening wire with a pair of pliers that looked older than both of us. I took my hat off, held it against my chest with both hands. My dark hair was matted with sweat and dirt, pushed back off my forehead where it wouldn't stay. "Ma'am," I said, "the creek on your east side. I'd like permission to draw water." She didn't look up right away. Finished her twist, set the pliers down. Then those hazel green eyes found mine, and I felt something shift in the ground under my boots that had nothing to do with the earth I'd been shoveling. "Take what you need," she said. 3 words. That was it. I thanked her and left. No small talk, no lingering. But walking back across her property line, I saw a fence rail that had come loose from its post, splintered at the nail, hanging crooked. I stopped, looked at it, looked back toward her. She'd already turned away, back to her wire. I fixed the rail. Took me maybe 20 minutes. I didn't tell her. She didn't mention it. But 2 days later, I crossed for water again, and the rail was holding. And I noticed she'd left a tin of biscuits on the fence post nearest the creek. No note, no name. Just biscuits wrapped in cloth, sitting there like they'd appeared from the air itself. That's how it started. Not with words, with work. Through October, the mounding continued. I worked dawn to dark. My pale gray-blue eyes burned from dirt and wind. My hands were raw inside gloves that had worn through at the fingertips. The army surplus shovel with its notched wooden grip became part of my arm. I ate with it leaning against my knee, slept with it beside my bedroll. Every morning I drove it into the hillside and pulled earth over the cabin walls, packing it tight, shaping it smooth. The structure was disappearing. That was the point. One afternoon, I looked up, and Anna Reed was standing on the road. Just standing there. Battered tin cup in her hand, steam curling up past those blade-sharp cheekbones and heavy hooded lids. She watched me work for maybe 10 minutes. Didn't speak. Didn't smile. Didn't shake her head the way everyone else did. She just drank her coffee and studied what I was building like she recognized something in it. Then she turned and walked away, that dark brown coat swaying against her legs, hands clasped behind her back. She was the only person in the entire valley who did not laugh. By mid-October, the cabin looks more like a hill than a house. Only the south-facing door and a small window remain visible. Caleb sets his shovel against the wall and waits. The first snow came on October 29th. Not the killing kind, just a warning, 2 inches that melted by noon. But everyone who'd been through a Montana winter knew what it meant. The land was done being patient. You had maybe 3 weeks to finish whatever you hadn't finished, and after that, the country would decide whether you lived or died, and it wouldn't lose sleep either way. The settlement moved with purpose. Hay got banked against cabin walls for insulation. Windows got sealed with rags and tallow. Wood piles grew taller. Smoke rose from every chimney by mid-morning and didn't stop until the following mid-morning. Frank Cahill's cabin, the biggest in the valley, naturally, sat there like a sermon nobody asked for. 2 stories, real glass windows, a porch with actual railings. He'd hired 2 men from Helena to help build it the previous spring, and he talked about it the way some men talk about their horses. Loudly, often, to people who didn't ask. Double-walled, he told anyone within earshot, rocking back on his heels, that brass-handled walking stick jabbing the air for emphasis. Proper chinked, not like some of these dugouts people are living in. He said dugouts the way you'd say rat holes. His pale brown eyes swept toward the hill where Caleb's buried cabin sat, and he smiled. Not a warm smile. The kind of smile a man wears when he's measuring himself against someone and wants you to know he won. Son of a bitch had $14 worth of contempt for every dollar Caleb didn't have. But Caleb wasn't listening. Caleb was busy. He started showing up at Eleanor's place sometime in the first week of November. Not every day, not announced, just present. The way weather is present. You look up and it's there, and you can't remember when it arrived. The first time, it was a hinge. Her barn door had been sagging on a rusted pin since August. She'd propped it with a length of cedar and worked around it the way you work around a bad tooth. Careful, compensating, never complaining. Caleb replaced the hinge with one he'd forged from a piece of scrap iron. He was gone before she came out of the house. The second time, it was firewood. A full cord, split clean, stacked against the south wall of her cabin where the snow wouldn't reach it. She found it in the afternoon. The axe marks were fresh. The chips were still pale. Eleanor stood there in her dark navy shawl, her honey-blonde braid pulled over one shoulder, loose wisps of hair catching the wind. She looked at the woodpile. She looked at the tree line. She folded her arms, that way she had, hands resting on her hips, surveying work the way a general surveys a field. The tarnished brass pocket watch on its leather cord hung against her collar. She did not thank him. He did not wait to be thanked. I think that's the part most people wouldn't understand. The silence wasn't cold. It was honest. 2 people communicating in the only language that meant anything out here. Labor. You don't say, "I see you." You fix the hinge. You stack the wood. You show up again tomorrow. Anna Reed saw it first. Of course she did. She came by Eleanor's place on a Tuesday, that battered tin coffee cup in her hand, handle bent at its permanent wrong angle. She was maybe 5'1", in her heavy brown coat, silver white hair pulled into that tight bun, sharp, pale blue eyes, missing exactly nothing. She stood at Eleanor's table and drank coffee, and watched through the window as Caleb, 200 yards out, reset a fence post that had been leaning since September. "That man digs like someone who's been cold before," Anna said. Eleanor did not respond. She lifted her own cup, drank, set it down. Anna didn't push. She never pushed. She just planted a sentence like a seed and walked away, hands clasped behind her back, head up, eyes already moving to the next thing. She saw the love before anyone had a name for it. The shared labor deepened the way roots deepen, quietly, below the surface, in directions nobody maps. Mid-November, Eleanor needed to move her small herd to the winter pasture, a flat stretch of bottomland 2 miles south where the creek kept a strip of grass alive even in January. 23 head, not many. Enough to keep one woman working from dawn to dark. Caleb was there at first light. His faded rust-brown coat hung open over the cream Henley, dark brown canvas trousers patched at the left knee, the short-handled army surplus shovel slung through his belt out of habit, even when there was nothing to dig. His dark brown hair was pushed back off his forehead, dirty and a little matted. Those pale gray-blue eyes watched the cattle the way they watched everything. Patient, measuring, waiting. They worked side by side for a full day, hardly speaking. She rode the left flank, he walked the right. When a cow broke toward the timber, he was already moving before Eleanor could turn her horse. When the trail narrowed at the creek crossing, she waved him forward without a word, and he knew exactly what she meant. Two people who fit into each other's work without instruction. Like a hand finding a glove it never tried on, but somehow already knew. At the creek, she handed him a canteen. Their fingers touched. His knuckles, raw and cracked from cold, against hers, which were just as rough, just as earned. Neither mentioned it. I still remember the stillness of that moment, the water running clear over brown stones, the smell of sage and horse and cold earth, the sound of cattle drinking. Her hazel-green eyes meeting his gray-blue ones for exactly 1 second longer than necessary. Then she took the canteen back, and they kept moving. Early November turned to late November. The temperature dropped to 10 below on a Thursday and didn't come back up. The canyon wind started, that low, constant moan that gets into your bones and stays there like a second heartbeat. Eleanor's cabin groaned against it. The timbers shifted. The doorframe popped. Caleb's buried hill sat silent. Whatever the wind threw at it just passed over, the way water passes over a stone in a creek. Frank's big cabin, his pride, his double-walled monument to himself, lost a shutter on the second night. He stood on his porch and cursed the cold like it owed him money. Then the real storm hit. 36 hours. That's how long the wind screamed down the canyon without stopping. Snow came sideways. You couldn't see 10 feet. The temperature didn't matter anymore because the wind made every number a lie. Eleanor's fence line is down in 3 places, and the wind has not stopped for 36 hours. She stands in her doorway and looks toward the hill where Caleb's cabin used to be, and for the first time, she thinks about asking someone for help. She did not ask for help. She pulled on her husband's old coat and walked into the wind herself. But Caleb was already there, at her fence line, in the dark, with his shovel and a coil of wire. Eleanor stopped at the edge of the pasture and watched him. The wind was coming sideways off the canyon, 30 miles an hour at least, driving ice crystals that cut exposed skin like ground glass. He had his rust-brown coat buttoned to the throat, that short-handled entrenching shovel slung through his belt, and his bare hands wrapped around a fence post that had snapped clean at the base. His dark hair was matted flat against his skull. The small birthmark on the left side of his neck was raw and red from the cold. She did not say thank you. She did not say, "Why are you here?" She walked to the next broken post, 12 feet down the line, and started digging. They worked in the dark for 3 hours before either of them spoke a full sentence. What words there were came out clipped and functional. Hold this. Pull here. One more. She held the wire taut while he drove staples with numb fingers. He braced the post while she packed frozen dirt around the base. Their breath came out in white clouds that the wind shredded before it rose a foot. Her honey blonde braid had come half undone, loose wisps frozen stiff against her cheeks. The tarnished brass watch on its leather cord hung outside her collar for once, swinging with every motion, and she did not tuck it back in. I am going to tell you something about love that nobody puts in songs. It does not start with a look across a room. It starts with your hands bleeding in the same cold, and neither of you leaving. That was November 22nd. The real storm had not even started yet. It hit 2 days later. 3 feet of snow in 24 hours. Wind chill dropped so far below zero, the mercury in the thermometer at Dawson's store contracted into a tiny silver ball and just sat there, refusing to measure it. The world became a white wall. You could not see your hand at arm's length. The snow was not falling. It was moving sideways, horizontal, a river of ice flowing through the air at 50 miles an hour. Frank Cahill's big cabin, that monument to imported lumber and Eastern engineering, cracked and groaned like a ship in heavy seas. His stovepipe clogged with driven snow. Ice formed on the inside of his walls, thick as a man's thumb, sweating and refreezing in cycles that warped the boards. He burned through his woodpile at a rate that would leave him short by February. 2 other settlement families, the Harpers and the Dawsons, lost livestock. 14 head of cattle between them, frozen standing up in a draw where they had huddled for shelter that never came. The cold was not weather. It was a physical enemy. It found every crack, every gap, every place where a man had built with pride instead of sense. And it punished him for it. Now, here is where this story pivots. Here is where one small, quiet fact becomes the only fact that matters. Caleb's earth-covered cabin was 55 degrees inside. 55. While the rest of the settlement burned wood like it grew on trees and still shivered under every blanket they owned, Caleb Mercer sat in his half-buried shelter with his pale gray-blue eyes calm and his hands steady, burning a quarter of the fuel anyone else burned. The mounded earth did what mounded earth has always done. It broke the wind. It held the heat. It turned the cabin into a burrow, the way prairie dogs and foxes and every other creature that actually belongs to this land already knew to do. The walls did not sweat. The stovepipe did not clog. The structure did not groan. He was warm. He was dry. He was calm. And the settlement realized, all at once, the way you realize a man you laughed at was the only one paying attention. that the drifter they called mad understood something fundamental about surviving this land. Something none of their square-cornered, plumb-line Eastern catalog houses understood. You do not fight the ground. You go into it. Frank was the last to admit it. And by admit, I mean he never did. He walked up the hill 2 days after the blizzard broke. Barrel chest puffed out, charcoal gray vest buttoned tight, that brass-handled walking stick in his right hand. He stood outside Caleb's half-buried door, the snow piled 4 feet high on either side of the entrance, and the earth roof barely visible under the drifts. And he stared at the structure. His pale brown eyes moved across the mounded walls, the chimney barely smoking, the door tight in its frame. He did not knock. He stood there for a long time, that walking stick tapping once against his boot. Then he turned and walked back down the hill. Some men would rather freeze than learn. Anna Reed came 3 days later. She was different about it. She stepped inside without asking, her heavy dark brown coat dusted with snow, her silver-white hair pulled tight in that low bun. She looked at the earthen walls. She looked at the stove, barely ticking with a small fire. She felt the warmth. Her sharp, pale blue eyes moved across everything. The efficiency, the logic, the deep knowing of it. She set her battered tin cup on his table, the bent handle catching the lamplight. "Your people were sodbusters?" Caleb looked at her. "My mother's people, Nebraska." Anna nodded once. That was all. The winter deepened. December came in like a door closing. Eleanor's cattle needed tending, hay hauled, water broken through ice, sick animals found and doctored. Caleb was there, every morning. He did not announce himself. He just appeared at her fence line with his shovel and his silence, and they worked. They shared meals after the labor, sat by her stove in the kitchen, eating whatever she had cooked, saying little. The physical closeness increased by degrees so small you could not mark them. A hand steadying her shoulder when she slipped on ice. A brush of knuckles passing a tin cup. She sat 3 feet from him, then 2, then close enough that he could smell sage and wood smoke in her hair, and he looked at his coffee instead of at her. They did not name what was forming. Naming it would mean deciding about it, and deciding meant risking, and both of them had lost enough to know exactly what risk tasted like. They worked together for 9 hours straight in a February storm, 36 hours of wind, and when they came inside, neither of them sat on opposite sides of the room anymore. By January, he was at her ranch more than his own, and neither of them had said a word about it. That is the truth of it. The way a life rearranges itself around something it cannot name. Caleb rode out from his earth cabin before the sun cleared the eastern ridgeline every morning. His faded, rust-brown coat buttoned to the collar, that short-handled entrenching shovel slung through his belt like it was part of his body. The dark brown hair pushed back off his forehead was greasy with cold and sweat before he even reached her gate. He watered the stock. He broke ice on the troughs with the notched wooden grip of that shovel, same steady rhythm every morning. And by the time Eleanor came out onto the porch with her navy shawl pulled tight and her braid over one shoulder, the work was already half done. She set a plate for him at supper. Did not ask. Did not announce it. Just a third setting at the table, the tin fork and the chipped plate, and a cup of coffee poured before he stomped his boots on the threshold. He hung his coat on the same peg every night, second from the left, beside the lantern hook, and she never moved it, never offered a different one, never said a damn word about the fact that a man's coat was hanging in her house like it belonged there. Because it did. He ate. She ate. They talked about the fence line or the wind or whether the bay mare's cough was getting worse. Then he rode back in the dark, 2 miles of frozen road under a sky so full of stars it looked like someone had taken a hammer to a sheet of glass. And every morning he came back. 43 days straight by the time I am telling you about. Not one missed. That is a courtship. That is the whole damn thing. Two people building a routine out of necessity, until the necessity becomes the want, and the want becomes the need, and neither of them can find the seam where one turned into the other. Then Frank Cahill showed up. He came on a Tuesday, mid-morning. His charcoal gray vest buttoned tight over that barrel chest, his brass-handled walking stick tucked under his arm like a riding crop he never earned. The black boots polished but scuffed at the toes, because Frank was always the kind of man who wanted to look like he worked without ever actually doing it. He stood in Eleanor's yard with his chin up and his weight rocked back on his heels, and he told her she was giving the settlement something to talk about. A single woman, a drifter, no arrangement, no understanding, no paper, no promise. People are asking questions, Eleanor. He said it like he was doing her a favor, like he was delivering charity to someone too simple to know she needed it. A woman in your position cannot afford to be careless. You've got a reputation, you've got land, and you've got some vagrant hanging around your property like a stray dog you made the mistake of feeding. A stray dog. That is what Frank Cahill called a man who had worked Eleanor's ranch for free through the worst winter in 11 years. A man who fixed every fence Frank's dead brother had let rot. A man who hauled water and split wood and never once asked what he was owed. A stray dog. Eleanor stood on her porch, honey blonde braid over her shoulder, the tarnished brass pocket watch on its leather cord tucked inside her collar where it always was. Her hazel green eyes did not blink. Her hands settled on her hips, that posture, that survey the work posture she wore like armor. And she looked at Frank the way a woman looks at a man she has been tolerating for years and has finally run out of reasons to keep doing it. The fence is fixed, she said. The cattle are fed. What exactly are you offering that he hasn't already done? Frank opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He tapped the brass handle of that walking stick against his thigh twice, turned, and walked back to his wagon. He had no answer. He never had an answer. Frank Cahill had opinions the way some men had debts, always accumulating, never worth a damn thing. 3 weeks later the test came. The bay mare, the one with the cough, the one Eleanor had been watching since December, went into labor on the coldest night of the year, 14 below. Wind off the mountains like a blade drawn across bare skin. Eleanor found me at the earth cabin at midnight, frost on her eyelashes, her breath coming in white bursts, and all she said was, "The mare." Caleb was dressed and riding beside her in 4 minutes flat. The barn was cold enough that their breath hung in the lantern light like smoke. The mare was down on her side, her flank heaving, and Caleb could see it immediately. The foal was turned wrong, one leg back. He had delivered foals before, on a spread outside Bozeman 3 years prior, and the knowledge was in his hands the way certain kinds of knowing live only in the body. He knelt in the straw, rolled his sleeves past his elbows, those long, ropey arms bare to the cold, his pale gray-blue eyes steady, his crooked nose close to the mare's neck, murmuring to her. Low sounds, not words exactly, just the tone. Eleanor held the lantern. She did not look away. It took 4 hours. 4 hours of patience and sweat and frozen hands and a mare that screamed twice in a way that made the walls shake. He repositioned the foal by feel alone. He did not rush. He did not curse. He did not leave when the blood came or when the mare kicked and caught him across the forearm, hard enough to leave a bruise that lasted 3 weeks. He stayed because the work needed doing. That is all. That is everything. The foal came at 4 in the morning, wet and shaking and alive. A filly, dark as creek mud, already trying to stand on legs that did not know what legs were for yet. Caleb cleared her nose and mouth and sat back on his heels in the straw, his hands bloody to the wrist, the short beard he had grown through winter matted with sweat, and he did not say a word. Eleanor stood in the barn doorway, hay in her hair, the brass pocket watch hanging loose outside her collar for once, catching the lantern light. Her face was something I cannot describe except to say it was open in a way it had not been before. She said his name, just his name, Caleb, standing in the barn doorway at 4 in the morning with a newborn foal wet on the straw behind her. And it was the first time anything between them sounded like a promise. Anna Reed came by the next morning. She rode in on her dun gelding with that battered tin coffee cup already in her hand, the handle bent at its permanent angle, her silver-white hair pulled into its low, tight bun, and her heavy brown coat hanging past her knees. She saw the foal standing on wobbly legs in the stall. She saw Eleanor's face, the softness in it, the way the exhaustion had settled into something that looked almost like peace. She saw Caleb mucking the stall with his sleeves still rolled up, the birthmark on his neck dark against the pale skin, working the shovel like he had been doing it his whole life, like this barn was his barn, like this work was his work. Anna said nothing. She refilled her tin cup from the pot on the stove and sat on a hay bale and watched with those sharp, pale blue eyes, hands clasped behind her back even while sitting. Her gaze moving between the two of them the way a woman watches something she predicted a long time ago finally arrive. She did not need to say it. She already knew. Spring came late that year, mid-April before the creek ran clear, and with it came the question neither of them had asked out loud. The snow pulled back from the valley in long, uneven strips, like a bedsheet being dragged off the earth. Meltwater ran in channels through the mud around my cabin, cutting little rivers I had to step over just to reach the woodpile. The aspens along the ridge went from gray sticks to pale green in about a week. Grass pushed up through the last ice crusts in the pasture. The whole world was waking up, and I stood in the doorway of my cabin watching it happen with a feeling in my chest I didn't have a name for yet. Restlessness. That's what I'd always called it. 11 years of drifting had taught me the rhythm. You winter somewhere, you work, you eat their food and fix their fences, and when the ground thaws, you roll your bedroll and go. The thaw was the signal. Always had been. Your blood starts moving faster, your eyes start drifting to the horizon, and one morning you wake up and your hands are already packing before your mind's made the decision. That morning, my hands were packing. Not dramatically. I didn't throw anything. I didn't make a speech to the empty room. I just untied the bedroll from the cot frame and retied it tight. Sorted the saddlebag, tin cup on the left, razor and soap wrapped in cloth on the right. $14 and change in a leather pouch tucked into the bottom. My army surplus shovel went through the belt loop the way it always did, the notched wooden grip warm and familiar against my hip. I moved through it like a man washing dishes. Automatic. Practiced. The body remembers what the body has done 100 times. Eleanor noticed. She didn't say a word. I came down to the main barn that afternoon to check on the foal. 3 weeks old now, leggy and bold, already nosing at the hay trough, and Eleanor was inside, brushing down the mare. Her honey blonde braid hung over one shoulder, loose wisps catching the light from the open door. The tarnished brass pocket watch on its leather cord hung outside her collar for once, ticking against her sternum. She looked at the saddlebag on my shoulder. She looked at my face. Then she went back to brushing the mare. That silence. I knew what it was. It was the silence of a woman holding something she refused to drop first. She'd done it before. With the ranch, with the work, with every hard season she'd carried alone. She would not ask. She would not beg. She would watch me leave with her chin lifted and her hands on her hips, and she would go right back to work the minute my horse cleared the ridge. I knew that about her. It made it worse. I saddled my horse that evening. Anna Reed found me at dawn. She came across the yard slow, her heavy brown coat hanging past her knees, her battered tin cup in one hand, steam rising from it into the cold morning air. Her silver-white hair was pulled tight into that low bun. Her sharp, pale eyes, almost gray, moved from my face to the packed horse and back. She didn't lecture. Anna Reed had never lectured anyone in her life. She stopped about 6 feet away, took a sip from that bent-handled cup, and said one thing. "The earth doesn't care if you come back. She does." Then she turned around and walked back toward her place, slow and stooped at the shoulders, but with her head up, the way she always moved. It was the most words Anna had spoken in the entire time I'd known her. She didn't wait for an answer. She didn't need one. She'd said what she came to say, and she was done with me. I stood there with my horse's reins in my hand for a long time. The road out of the valley ran south along the creek, then cut east through a stand of cottonwoods before hitting the main trail toward Helena. I made it as far as the cottonwoods. Frank Cahill was standing in the road, not blocking it, just standing there, his charcoal gray vest buttoned tight over his barrel chest, his brass-handled walking stick planted in the mud. His sandy blonde hair was combed flat, his pale brown eyes squinting against the morning sun. He looked like a man who'd been waiting, but didn't want to admit it. He didn't argue. He didn't threaten. Frank Cahill, who'd spent most of the winter looking at me like I was something stuck to his boot, who'd told me I was seasonal help with delusions, who'd sneered about drifters and charity cases every chance he got. Frank Cahill said something I never expected to hear. "You were right about the cabin. I should have said so sooner." That was it. No apology, no warmth, just a fact, delivered the way you'd report the weather. I nodded. He nodded. That was enough between men like us. He stepped off the road, and I could have ridden past him and kept going. I turned my horse around. Eleanor was standing on her porch when I came back up the hill. The mountains rose behind her, still white-capped, enormous and indifferent. Her dark navy shawl was pulled tight around her shoulders. Her sage-green dress was faded nearly to gray at the hem. Her boots were caked with mud. Her hands were at her sides, not on her hips, not folded, just down, open. She didn't cry. She didn't plead. She didn't say a damn thing about where I'd been, or why I'd saddled my horse, or how it felt to watch me go. She looked at me with those warm, hazel-green eyes, and her chin was up, and her voice was steady, and she said one word. "Stay." That was the bravest thing I'd ever seen a person do. She was afraid to need someone again. She'd buried a husband and run a ranch alone and taught herself to want nothing from anyone. And she said it anyway, standing there on warped porch boards with mountain wind pulling at her braid. I'd been running for 11 years. I stopped running on a Tuesday afternoon in April, on a porch that needed painting, because a woman who didn't owe me anything asked me not to go. She said it standing on her porch with the mountains behind her, the simplest sentence in the English language. "Stay." and he set his bag down on her porch boards and did not pick it up again. He stayed through that summer, and the next winter, and the one after that, and every winter for 28 years. They married in October of that first year. No church, no dress shipped from St. Louis. Eleanor wore the sage green cotton dress she always wore, the tarnished brass pocket watch tucked inside her collar like it always was. Caleb wore the cream-colored Henley with the sleeves rolled to his elbows and his dark brown hair pushed back off his forehead, still a little matted from the morning's work because they'd been stringing wire since dawn and he'd barely had time to wash his hands. Anna Reed stood as witness, that battered tin coffee cup in her grip, the bent handle catching afternoon light. She didn't cry. She just watched with those sharp, pale blue eyes and nodded once, like she was confirming something she'd known for months. Frank Cahill was there, standing at the back, arms crossed, chin up, weight rocked back on his polished but scuffed boots, that brass-handled walking stick planted in the dirt beside him like a flag he was trying to claim territory with. He didn't speak during the ceremony. Didn't need to. His face said everything. The tight jaw, the pale brown close-set eyes scanning Caleb like he was appraising livestock that had been priced too high. Afterward, Frank shook Caleb's hand and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Well, I hope you're better at husbanding than you are at building sensible structures." Caleb shook his hand back. Didn't squeeze, didn't smile. Just said, "I appreciate you coming, Frank." That was the last time Frank Cahill tried to make him small. Because the thing about a man who stays is that eventually, even the loudest voice in the room runs out of reasons to call him temporary. The years stacked up the way fence posts do, one at a time, each one ordinary, each one holding something. They built a proper house on Eleanor's land in the spring of 1880. 4 rooms, a real stone fireplace, glass windows freighted in from Helena at a cost Caleb never told anyone because it would have made them choke. $11.60 for 4 panes, plus $3 for the freight. Eleanor's hazel green eyes went wide when they arrived unbroken. She touched the glass with her fingertips like it was something holy. Caleb watched her from the doorway, his short-handled entrenching shovel slung through his belt, and didn't say a word. But the earth-buried cabin on the north slope stayed standing. He maintained it every spring, packed new sod on the roof, checked the drainage channels, replaced the timber where rot crept in. Other settlers came to look at it over the years, skeptical at first, the same way everyone had been. By 1885, half the homesteads in the valley had earth-banked walls on their north sides. Nobody called him mad anymore. They called it the Mercer method. He never corrected them or took credit. It was just dirt and logs and stubbornness. Nothing worth naming after a man. The herd grew from 30 head to 120. The fences never fell again. Anna Reed died in the winter of 1887. Quietly. The way she did everything. On her own terms, without asking anyone's permission or making a fuss about it. Eleanor and Caleb found her in her cabin on a Tuesday morning when no smoke came from her chimney by 9. She was in her chair by the cold stove, the tin coffee cup in her hand, her silver-white hair still pulled into that low, tight bun, her sharp, pale eyes closed. She looked like she'd just decided to stop watching. She'd been watching people her whole life. I think she finally saw enough. Eleanor took the tin cup home, washed it, set it on a shelf in their kitchen above the stove. It stayed there for decades, the bent handle facing out, catching light every morning. Neither of them ever drank from it. They didn't have to. It was enough that it was there. I think about the war sometimes, not the one between armies, the one inside. The one that never really ends, just gets quieter. He was afraid to stop running. She was afraid to need someone again. Those two fears circled each other for months in that first year. In the silence over meals, in the careful distance they kept while working side by side, in the way she'd reach for something and pull her hand back when his was already there. They chose each other knowing exactly what it cost. And the cost was simple. The cost was the risk of loss. The possibility that one morning you wake up and the other chair is empty and the coffee is cold and the silence isn't the comfortable kind anymore. They paid that price every single day for 28 years. And the reward was 28 years of mornings, of coffee poured without asking, of a hand on a shoulder in passing, of work done together until the work and the love were the same thing, and neither of them could remember when they'd been different. Grandchildren came. They ran across the land like creek water, fast and noisy and impossible to contain. The ranch endured. The work endured. The fences Caleb built still held. That's not poetry. That's just what happens when a man sets a post deep and tamps the earth right and comes back in spring to check it. The last time I saw them, and I mean the last real picture I have in my mind, the one that stays when everything else fades, it was evening, late summer. The kind of light that turns everything gold and makes you think the whole world is about to say something important and then decides not to, because the silence is better. 2 chairs on the porch. A silver-haired man with pale gray-blue eyes and a crooked nose, his broad shoulders still hunched slightly forward, like he was bracing into wind even when there wasn't any. A silver-haired woman beside him, petite and upright, the brass pocket watch still on its leather cord around her neck. Their hands touching on the armrest between them. Not gripping, just touching. The mountains turning gold in the evening light. Behind them, up on the north slope, the buried cabin still standing. Wildflowers growing on the earthen roof. Purple and yellow against the dark sod. Still solid after all those years. Still warm inside in winter. I buried half a cabin before the first frost. They thought I'd gone mad. But the snow fell and the walls held, and I stayed. That's the whole story. That's all any of it ever was. Finding a reason to stay, and staying.